When the nurse wheeled me to the front entrance of the hospital that afternoon, I clutched my small overnight bag and looked for my son's car. I had texted Michael earlier that morning, letting him know I'd be ready around 2 o'clock. I thought he'd meet me out front, the way sons do when their mother is being discharged. But the minutes passed, cars came and went, and my phone buzzed with a message I'll never forget. He told me to just call an Uber, that he and Vanessa were busy. No explanation, no apology. Just a few words that cut deeper than the surgery scar on my side. I remember sitting there, feeling the chill of the hospital's revolving door draft against my skin, realizing my son couldn't be bothered to pick me up. It wasn't just the ride, it was everything behind it. The quiet dismissal. The unspoken truth that I wasn't important enough to rearrange his schedule for. In that moment, something inside me cracked. For years, I'd told myself his distance was because he was busy. His job at the firm, raising Tyler, keeping up with Vanessa's endless social calendar. I excused the missed phone calls, the short visits, the way my invitations always seemed like an afterthought. I reminded myself that family life is complicated, and children grow into adults with their own responsibilities. But that afternoon, outside the hospital, I felt the sharp sting of reality. I wasn't busy to him. I was optional. As I sat there waiting for a stranger's car to collect me, my mind drifted back to all the sacrifices I'd made for him. The nights I stayed awake tutoring him through geometry. The mornings I packed lunches before running off to teach a full classroom of second graders. The years of quiet endurance after his father passed, when I kept our small world together with sheer willpower. I had poured every ounce of myself into raising him, into giving him the foundation for the life he enjoys today. And here I was, dismissed with a text message. It's a peculiar kind of pain when you realize the people you love most can treat you as disposable. I thought betrayal would feel like fire, but it felt more like ice. Numb at first, then spreading until it reached the deepest parts of me. That short ride home in the back seat of a rideshare wasn't just transportation, it was the beginning of clarity. Because I understood then this wasn't about a ride. It was about respect. And when respect is gone, everything else starts to unravel. That day was not just an ending. It was the first step toward a reckoning I didn't yet see coming. A few days after that humiliating ride home, I got a call from the bank. At first, I thought it was just routine, maybe a reminder about my checking account or a question about my small retirement savings. But the voice on the other end asked if I could come in to discuss a matter of concern regarding property documents. My stomach dropped. I had no property business left. The house was paid off years ago, and I hadn't signed anything new. Still, I went. That's how I found myself sitting across from Robert Hamilton, the branch manager. He spread a folder across the polished desk, his expression careful, measured. He told me they'd been reviewing paperwork connected to Michael's most recent mortgage refinance. I remember nodding politely, still not understanding why I was there. Then he turned the folder so I could see. My signature, my full name was there in black ink on the co-signer's line. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I studied the loops and strokes, and though it looked like mine, I knew in my bones I hadn't signed a thing. My hand trembled as I traced it on the page, a cold wave rushing through me. I asked myself over and over, how long had it been sitting there? How many times had Michael used my name without my knowing? Robert explained gently that not only was I listed as guarantor, but also that supporting funds had been shown as gifts from me, evidence that I was draining my savings to prop up their lifestyle. The same money I thought was helping with groceries for Tyler or the occasional school expense was being written into official records as proof I was an expensive burden. I sat frozen, my ears buzzing. All those years of stretching dollars, clipping coupons, making sure Michael had enough for soccer cleats and prom tuxedos, it had all been twisted. He had turned my sacrifices into weapons against me. The betrayal stung in a way even harsher than that hospital text. It wasn't just neglect. It was theft of trust, theft of identity. I felt outrage rise like fire, hot and choking, burning through the numbness I'd carried. Looking back at Robert's steady gaze, I realized this wasn't some clerical mistake. This was deliberate. My son had signed me away without a word, securing his comfort while risking my future. I leaned back, gripping the arms of the chair, and whispered inside myself, neglect is one thing. But this is exploitation. Something far deeper was unfolding here, and though I didn't know it yet, Robert was about to reveal a truth that would turn my entire world upside down. As I sat there trying to steady myself, Robert closed the folder gently and studied me. There was a softness in his eyes, something that felt oddly familiar. At first, I chalked it up to kindness after all. I must have looked pale as a ghost. But then he said my name. Not the clipped Mrs. Sullivan most bankers use, but Dorothy, drawn out in a tone I hadn't heard in over 40 years. My breath caught in my throat. It was in that moment I really looked at him, not just at the neat tie and the professional smile, but at the lines at the corners of his mouth, the way his gray eyes searched mine. A flash of memory came rushing back, faster than I could stop it. Summer nights at the fairgrounds, the smell of kettle corn, and a boy with those same gray eyes promising me forever. I whispered his name before I could think. Robert. And just like that, time folded in on itself. Sitting across from me wasn't just a bank manager, it was my first love. The boy who had once held my hand under the bleachers, who had talked about building a life together before life and family pulled us apart. He smiled then, a little sad, a little knowing. He admitted he'd recognized me the second I walked in, but hadn't wanted to overwhelm me. My chest tightened as 1,000 questions pressed at once. How had we lost each other? Why had our story ended so abruptly? The truth spilled out between us in halting sentences. His parents had disapproved of me, said I wasn't the right match for someone with his future. My own mother, worn down by grief and practicality after my father died, had told me Robert would only hold me back. And so the letters slowed, the visits stopped, and life carried us away on separate currents. Sitting there, I felt the sting of those old wounds. All those years I thought he had simply moved on, perhaps even forgotten me, when in reality we had both been steered apart by people who thought they knew better. The sadness of what was lost pressed down on me, heavy and undeniable. And yet, beneath the ache, there was a warmth I hadn't felt in decades. We spoke softly about the paths we'd taken his career in banking, my years as a teacher, the families we built, the losses we endured. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a quiet understanding that life had been complicated, and that even so, something between us had survived. I found myself laughing through tears as we recalled the dreams of two teenagers who thought love was enough to conquer the world. There was tenderness in the way he looked at me, not as someone broken by betrayal, but as the girl he had once adored and perhaps still did. For the first time in weeks, my anger gave way to something gentler. In that office, I wasn't just a mother discarded by her son. I was also a woman rediscovering a piece of herself she thought had been buried forever. When I finally stood to leave, Robert touched my hand, steady, reassuring. He told me I wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. And as I walked out into the late afternoon light, I realized this reunion wasn't chance. He had come back into my life at the very moment I needed someone who remembered my worth. It struck me then this wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. Something larger was unfolding, and Robert might be the very ally I needed for the storm that was still ahead. That night, after meeting Robert, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing with anger and clarity in equal measure. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't drowning in confusion. I knew exactly what Michael had done, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. The next day, Robert and I sat together in a quiet corner of a diner, the kind with worn booths and the smell of fresh coffee lingering in the air. He laid out the facts in plain language, the forged signature, the misrepresented funds, the way Michael had painted me as a liability rather than a mother who had carried him through storms. Hearing it spelled out that way, stripped of excuses, hit me like a hammer. But instead of sinking under the weight, something different happened. I felt myself straightening, shoulders pulling back, as though all the years of bowing my head had come to an end. Robert must have seen it too. He looked at me across the table, his hand warm over mine, and told me I had every right to stand up for myself. I believed him. That afternoon, I found myself pacing my living room, rehearsing the words I needed to say. I thought about all the times I had let Michael brush past my feelings, the dinners where I sat ignored, the subtle digs from Vanessa I swallowed in silence, the way I told myself it was better to keep the peace than risk losing my son altogether. I had traded pieces of myself for scraps of affection, and now, here I was, nearly erased. Not anymore. I spoke the words aloud as if Michael were sitting across from me. I told him I knew what he had done. I let my voice rise and then fall into calm certainty. The kind of tone that doesn't beg to be heard, but demands it. Each time I practiced, the tremor in my voice faded, replaced by steel. Memories surged as I rehearsed. I saw myself working late into the night at the school just to afford his baseball uniforms. I remembered walking to work in the cold because the car needed repairs and I wanted him to have lunch money. These weren't just sacrifices, they were investments. And now he had gambled them away like they were nothing. As the hours passed, I noticed something shift inside me. For years, I'd seen myself as the aging mother, fragile, tucked away in a corner, but preparing for that confrontation. I began to recognize the woman I once was, the one who held a family together when tragedy struck, who taught dozens of children to believe in themselves, who loved fiercely even when it wasn't returned. That woman wasn't weak. She had just been buried under disappointment. Robert called that evening to check on me, and I could hear the quiet pride in his voice when I told him I was ready. He didn't offer to fight the battle for me. He knew, as I did, this was something I had to face myself. But just knowing he'd be near, steady as ever, gave me courage I didn't know I still had. By the time morning came, my resolve was unshakable. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blouse that made me feel composed, strong. I looked in the mirror and told myself the truth. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman demanding to be seen. As I walked out the door toward the bank, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with certainty. The time for silence was over. The time for confrontation had arrived. The morning of the meeting, the air felt sharper, as if the world itself understood what was about to happen. I walked into the bank with my chin lifted, my footsteps steady on the polished floor. Robert had told me exactly when the meeting was scheduled, and though my heart pounded, it wasn't with fear, it was with purpose. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw Michael already seated at the long table. His posture was rehearsed, confident, like a man who believed he still had full control. Beside him, Vanessa sat stiffly, her hands folded over a designer bag. Her lips pressed into a line that reminded me of every smug smile she had given me over the years. Across from them, the loan officer shuffled papers, clearly preparing to hear Michael's pitch. When I stepped through the doorway, Michael's face drained of color. His carefully arranged confidence cracked in an instant. Vanessa's eyes widened, then narrowed, as if trying to calculate whether this was coincidence or sabotage. The silence that followed my entrance was thick, broken only by the rustle of papers as the loan officer glanced up. Confused, I took a seat opposite my son without being asked. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I simply folded my hands in front of me and looked at him. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking. I was the one commanding the room. Michael cleared his throat, trying to recover, and began explaining his case. He spoke about caring for his aging mother, about the financial burden of covering my living expenses, and how these loans were structured around ensuring my needs were met. Each word was another knife twisting, not because they were true, but because they were deliberate lies, dressed as devotion. I let him finish. Then, in a voice calm enough to make every head turn, I said I'd like to add something. I watched him squirm as I pulled from my folder copies of my bank statements, proof of the money I had given freely over the years, not as a dependent draining him, but as a mother supporting her son. I laid them out one by one on the polished table. I explained that I had never agreed to co-sign his mortgage, that my so-called signature was not mine. I spoke of the day I discovered the papers, of the shame that turned quickly into fury. And as I spoke, I could feel the strength returning to me with every word. The loan officer's pen froze mid-note. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to Michael, who now looked less like a confident provider and more like a boy caught red-handed. His face grew red, his voice stumbling as he tried to interject, but I pressed on. I reminded him and the room of the years I had carried him alone. How I had worked extra shifts, skipped meals, and done whatever it took to make sure he had a future. And now that very future was being used as a weapon against me. My voice did not waver. I wanted them all to see that I was not frail, not feeble, and certainly not powerless. The silence that followed was heavy. The loan officer leaned back, clearly unsettled by what had unfolded. Michael's carefully built facade was shattered. He couldn't even meet my eyes. I gathered my papers, stood slowly, and pushed back my chair. I didn't need to shout or demand anything more. The truth was enough. As I walked out of that room, my steps echoed not with anger, but with triumph. For the first time in years, I had taken my voice back. And behind me, my son's reputation lay in pieces, right where his lies belonged. When I left that conference room, I didn't feel the rush of victory I had imagined. What I felt was something deeper, quieter, like a heavy weight finally being set down after years of carrying it. The air outside the bank was cool, and I remember pausing on the steps, drawing in a breath that felt freer than any in a long time. My son's lies had been laid bare, and though there was no joy in humiliating him, there was undeniable relief in reclaiming my truth. I wish I could say it was only pride that filled me, but the truth is more complicated. Alongside empowerment came sorrow. Sorrow that it had come to this. Sorrow that the little boy I once held close had grown into a man capable of betraying me so deeply. That's the thing about family wounds, they cut both ways. The justice felt real, but so did the loss. That evening, Robert stopped by with dinner from a local deli. We sat at my small kitchen table, and for the first time in years, the silence around me wasn't hollow, it was peaceful. He listened as I recounted the confrontation, his eyes steady, his presence grounding. And when I finally admitted how torn I felt, how victory could taste so much like grief, he simply reached for my hand. No words, just warmth. It reminded me that healing isn't always about erasing pain. It's about finding someone willing to sit with you in it. Over the days that followed, I thought a lot about what this chapter of my life meant. For so long, I had let myself believe that age made me invisible, that my voice no longer mattered. Michael and Vanessa had counted on that silence, banking on the idea that I would be too timid, too weary to fight back. But they were wrong. Age doesn't erase strength, it sharpens it. Life's trials carve wisdom into us, layer by layer, and sometimes it takes being pushed to the edge to remember just how much we're capable of. I don't know yet what the future holds for my relationship with Michael. Maybe one day he'll understand the damage he caused, and maybe one day forgiveness will feel possible. But forgiveness is not forgetting, and it will never mean accepting less than respect. What I do know is this: I no longer define myself by who chooses to value me or who chooses to discard me. My worth was never theirs to measure. And then there's Robert. Life has a strange way of circling back, doesn't it? Decades after we were torn apart, here we are again, older, worn in places, but somehow more complete. His return feels like a reminder that even after deep loss, new beginnings are possible. Maybe not the kind of beginning where you chase youthful dreams, but one rooted in companionship, trust, and the quiet joy of being truly seen. To anyone listening, I want to leave you with this: betrayal may wound you, but it does not define you. Silence may be forced upon you, but it does not mean your voice is gone. And age, it isn't a cage. It's a crown. Proof that you've survived storms and still stand. Resilience is not just enduring, it's rising, again and again, until you no longer bow to the weight others place on you. My story isn't unique. Too many of us have been underestimated, discarded, or betrayed by those we love most. But that doesn't have to be the end of our story. If you're listening now, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments. Tell me the moments you chose yourself, the times you found strength when others thought you had none left. Because your story matters, too. And sometimes, telling it is the first step toward taking your power back. So here I stand, not as a broken woman, not as a forgotten mother, but as someone who knows her worth. And if my journey proves anything, it's that resilience shines brightest when the world expects you to dim.